Okay, massive week on the geopolitical side, and the whole world, all eyes on Trump, as Trump is looking to unwind the effects of the Biden administration by his pro-Israel policy that was taking us to World War III. Now, I don't know, I don't pretend to know what's going on, but I do believe that there are two outcomes. One is absolute carnage, World War III. And another is peace like we've never seen before. And I'm going to choose to be deluded that we are moving towards an environment of peace. But I follow the money, and I don't like where Trump got his money from. So he has a battle. And I'm hoping that my understanding of Trump right now is that he goes wherever the money is, will lead us to his self-interest fighting against the self-interest of World War III that will destroy his wealth. And so I'm going off that presumption. But does that lead to him going the same way JFK went and Abraham Lincoln went? As I don't know. Look, I just know that there are two outcomes, and we're going to follow it all the way. And I will keep following the money and not being fooled by the narrative. So in the geopolitical section, with all the macro section, the Bitcoin section, all of these trends, the weakening, the retreat to America being a regional power rather than a global hegemony because the world's too complicated, I believe Trump's trying to wrap up the bows and hand over certain structures and focus on the regional power. So Trump said that he had a very good talk with the Russian president, Putin, over the phone. And people freak out because USAID took over the BBC. USAID took over the Ukrainian media. USAID was funding through the National Endowment of Democracy, the coups that led to implanting Zelensky over Yanukovych, and led to the coup and the war that started in 2014 that the media told you started in 2022. And so now all of that is being revealed. There's like this whole thing of, but everyone told us we were standing up for democracy. I can't stand to believe that all of this was for the profits of the military-industrial complex and our media lied to us. That is causing Stockholm syndrome for people that really don't want to face that their money was being used for evil. And it was creating wealth inequality and inflation that's no longer working for them because the dollar is blowing up on itself right now, which is why we need the reform globally. So Trump said Putin, wants to see people stop dying. Suddenly it's a very different narrative. Remember in February 2022, when we switched from a death counter on the TV saying that we're evil grandma killers if we don't inject ourselves, to saying everybody needs to fight now and we don't really care about that one. We now only care about looking at Putin. And this is only just started because he's evil, evil, evil. Now, I have no doubt that governments are evil. I have no doubt that there are different models that lead to atrocities in freedom of speech. But my belief is that's not what America's trying to solve. America's justifying the profits of the proof of weapons network because we follow the money. We're not gullible idiots because we don't follow their narrative. They use that as an excuse for actually they want the opposite. They want people that they can negotiate with easily, which means the opposite of democracy. And a person's struggle against their country and their government should be internal. Because every time an external force pretends that they're helping, they end up funding regime change, which leads to countries like Libya, Syria, Sudan, which are absolutely destroyed, death and destruction, coups, competing colonial empires pretending that they're helping when they're just raping, pillaging, and their resources. It's an internal struggle, but the external help never is external help. It's about taking resources and making it worse for people. We must have learned that by now through every post-war conflict that the CIA and the deep state have used since post-World War II. And we don't even want to get in those. I'm not going to go. I've covered the history of those and how that set the Federal Reserve Proof of Weapons Network up in the first place in previous episodes. You can go to my blog on simondixon.com, look at the history of central banking, for example, and look at other different episodes if you want to really freak out. And go to Apple Podcasts as well and Spotify, and you can subscribe to my podcast. And that is a more censorship-resistant environment right now. And you can download it, listen to it in your own time while you're driving, and with no extra time as well, because I know these things can get long. Okay, Putin came out this week and he confirmed that he is going to meet in person with US President Trump to discuss ending the conflicts with Ukraine. Brilliant. And we were told that the evil thing, you should not speak with these people, that's evil. We were also told that you should arrest them immediately, but no longer you need to care about those things because Netanyahu also got the same crimes against humanity for the much, much worse civilian attacks that Netanyahu's been inflicting in Palestine. Much, much worse than what you're seeing with Putin, because they just want to take the narrative that they control and make you feel the justification that you want to feel. Disgusting, the whole thing. But anyway, Putin said, we are ready. Trump says he wants to, he expects to meet with Putin in Saudi Arabia. So I think all eyes are on Saudi Arabia for the reasons that I covered in the macro section, for the sovereign wealth fund, the transition to deficit to surplus, a retreat from world reserve currency as the dollar to regional power. And Saudi Arabia and the GCC is the regional power that doesn't want all of these covert destabilizations anymore. And they're set the conditions steadfast for the last 2 years. What is it? They said, Israel, you have to have a two-state solution. Now, we know that you get the fake ones. I'm not talking about the fake ones, where Epstein blackmailed, Clinton, as was, if you read the book, One Nation Under Blackmail, it goes through exactly how that happened. And then Clinton was pretending he was delivering peace, but allowing Israel to sabotage it, and then pushing the narrative that the Arabs don't want to do it. And all the narrative and the headache you see today with whenever you're debating these issues. Saudi has said there has to be a two-state solution. There has to be Palestinian self-determination. The whole world said that, but only America has been every year in United Nations veto voting against peace while pretending that they're negotiating peace. Obviously doing that for Israel because of their Israel first policy, because US aid is funding Israel and more other blackmail networks. And then all of that blackmail has happened to Congress, and the money's going back through organizations like AIPAC and other NGOs and military industrial complex and all the other ones, in order to make sure that you cannot rise in Congress unless you have a pro-Zionist policy as well. And so that's the reality of the current situation. That's what you're up against if you want to be honest and if you want to get to the truth. And by following the money, that's how we get to the truth. And without truth, there can be no peace. So you either continue in denial and tell me I'm a tinfoil hat person, or you get smarter and wise up that now is the time to do this. Anyway, so Saudi and the Gulf Cooperation, GCC, they hold all of the key to, I think, both of the conflicts ending. So they want to Trump, because this was a US proxy war, let's face, against Russia. Europe was essentially the bait to be destroyed so that it could push up the euro dollar. Now is the time for end to that because of all the reasons I've said already. So President Trump and Russian President Putin, they have agreed to start negotiations immediately. They will visit each other in each other's nations, and they will meet in Saudi Arabia next. Trump said immediately after that phone call was announced, the Moscow Stock Exchange pumped like crazy. So this implies that there is going to be an opening up. And if these negotiations lead to the end of sanctions, how do you get to the end of sanctions? Well, you say that Iran, you can't have a nuke, is what they want to do. But instead, we'll remove sanctions. We won't have a nuclear deal like last time. Instead, you just get an economy. And so rather than doing what Biden did, where he said, we'll give you 6 billion, but you'll have sanctions, and then you open up to inspection, instead, no money. America gets to save money so that they can work on their internal policy and monetary reform. They can pretend that they're doing it for some other reason, not because they're broke, and they still look strong. And then you can have Iran that is working with the GCC, which was the China plan. The China plan through BRICS was to normalize between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they started that. America can take credit for that. And maybe you can get some normalization. If you can get there, then you can say, Iran, stop funding the additional proxies, but we need a real two-state solution. How do we maintain it? Because traditionally, Israel would create carnage, and then we'd pretend that it's the crazy Iran. Instead, we could blame it all on that with the fake war on terror. Instead, we say, let's do it genuinely. Let's wrap it all up with Saudi. We get the investment we need. We get the AI investment. And we get a security deal with Saudi Arabia. We get to sell our proof of weapons network, prop it up at the same time as transitioning. And Saudi Arabia, the GCC, with Iran as an ally, get to actually work on peace. What a thing. And that requires a two-state solution and then the end of all the craziness. Hopefully. Again, deluded, as you may call it, but the other path is just too unthinkable, especially as the geopolitical environment has changed. If America was still working on propping up the dollar through war, death, and destruction, then I would say the second that we'll go through. But because it's not, I'm going to remain deluded in thinking that maybe, just maybe, this can be done. And that was reflected in the Moscow Stock Exchange Index ETFs as well. And we shall see. Some of the narrative we're getting from the Trump administration, well, you've got the crazy ones, which are still saying there's no such thing as West Bank, there's no such thing as Gaza, call it Judea and Samaria, and they want to fulfill the Messianic vision of returning the Messiah by allowing the Likud party in order to rebuild the temple and sacrifice the red heifer, which is the stated goal of half the Israeli government, which requires taking down Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that's why October the 7th was allowed to happen in the first place, so that they could weaponize. And that's why they had the Hannibal Directive of Israel killing its own people at the same time as Palestinians going in for the hostage swap. We're getting some of that narrative still being propped up, and US aid obviously funded the media to make you think that there were 40 beheaded babies and mass sexual violence, all revealed. Even the Israeli chief that did it has now said it happened, and people still want to deny it, saying that's rubbish. He went on Israel TV and said, we implemented the Hannibal Directive. Even one of the ladies, the first hostage to be released, said and blamed Netanyahu on national TV, blaming Netanyahu for the IDF firing and killing their own people. And they had the tanks and their Apache helicopters. It was all. Make sure you reveal the documentary Atrocity Inc. now that US aid has revealed exactly how it works. That's on my blog. You can get it there. It's a great documentary created by great journalism, fighting against the proof of weapon network, Grey Zone. Please watch it. Just look it up. Atrocity Inc. How October the 7th was weaponized in order to destroy Gaza. And remember, all the AI trends and Palantir were involved in all of it as well. Well, one of the people in the Trump administration, I think his name is Peter Hegseth. Maybe I got that wrong. Sorry if I got that wrong. I'm famous for getting these names wrong. He came out and said no more US funding for Ukraine and no more weapons for Ukraine. That led to a hissy fit in Europe that are doing the bidding of the ECB for NATO in order to do their Euro-dollar strategy and their US first strategy, because they're all corrupt and rich rather than being European first. he also said what we knew all along, which was the end of the Cold War, and all of the WikiLeaks documents that everyone knew. Go to my X. I published all of the WikiLeaks video where I went through all the documents that they knew that this would lead to the war if you can agitate Putin. And so, he basically is now telling the truth that Ukraine can't join NATO. He doesn't see it as realistic. Couldn't we have said that before all the death and destruction? Before the facade of paying for the media? I hope you're realizing what this is right now as we retreat and take that evil and exchange it for the next evil, which is our AI one. Anyway, Marco Rubio came out on the Trump administration. We cannot return to the pre-2014 borders. We cannot have Minsk Agreement 3.0. All of this was known. This revealed the 2014 CIA coup. And that's what led to more power to Russia. The same agreement. This has happened 2 times. Now it's happened for the 3rd time. You just weren't paying attention, so you got tricked into it. And now we get everything being revealed as well. It's the very first time that they've been completely honest about the war. They're saying that it cannot be Minsk Agreement 3.0. We never had that narrative before. That wasn't the USA aid-funded narrative that was fed to us. And they're saying that actually the real reason for this is that Russia's security must be considered in all negotiations. So the CIA implant Zelensky, who is allegedly, if you listen to Trump, who's telling maybe the truth, maybe exaggerated, that $350 billion has gone into the military-industrial complex, corruption. Only a tiny amount of it made it to Ukraine. And the 100 billion that was rinsed through the ECB in Europe, and all the NATO shenanigans that happened with it. And Zelensky was the implant in order to achieve that corruption, who hasn't done election, that we're told is the hero through the media, that has no chance of being re-elected if it actually went to what we're meant to believe are democracies, needs to have the Ukrainians decide who's going to be the leader. Anyway, it said, Ukraine can't join NATO. And so he came out and said, if we can't join NATO, then we have to make Ukraine into NATO. And so that is building its own military base. But I just don't think Zelensky is going to survive it, because I believe that the unpopularity, while we're told in Europe he's the most popular ever, I think people have realized that the death and destruction is unbearable. And there have been far too many soldiers killed as a result of this. It's the most unethical thing that we're led to believe is our ethics. And for some Stockholm syndrome, we want to believe that because Putin is a dictator is why we did it. He may be. Leave that for their internal struggle, because you don't care about that when you don't have a strategic interest and you don't have the media telling you how you should feel. Hence, US aid exposure. So at the very same time, when the peace happening, we get the truth and the end of the gaslighting and a transition to this AI world as well. So the proof of weapons network and the strategy has been exposed. It didn't really hit the mainstream narrative, but hopefully you can follow the money, or you can use BitcoinHardTalk in order to get it. And you can cross-reference it on WikiLeaks and now the official Doge website that will reveal all this stuff as well. And you can start to put it together and realize, boy, have I been lied to. And that's why there's record low trust. The Fed prints the money. America suffers inflation. Inflation indebtens those that are on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network and benefits those that can borrow at 0% interest through quantitative easing or borrowing against its stock, because it has the relationship with the large banks that create the Wall Street large companies. That means those that are the poorest pay 30% credit card interest or payday loans at 40% predator loans to meet their rent. to prop up the subsidies of the banks that get to create the dollar. They create the dollar through their digital currency backed by debt, so that they get to skim off all the interest from money that they created out of thin air by being a shareholder in the Federal Reserve. They can then bribe the lobbies. That lobbies then leads to rigging the system for the largest companies that they can borrow at 0%. Wealth gets redistributed, asset prices goes up, consumer wages doesn't go up. That leads to more unemployment. We get AI that leads to more unemployment. And then you get that as the internal structure. Then you export that globally through the International Monetary Fund and by using organizations and NGOs in order to topple governments, destabilize regions, if you want a textbook operation that has happened recently, look at Bangladesh, create colored revolutions. Then you have your CIA operatives or your Mossad operatives or your MI6 operatives, depending on the region. They fire some guns. That leads to the person that was going to do a deal with China and do a Belt and Road Initiative being expelled. Once they're expelled, you get Muhammad Yunus. Muhammad Yunus creates a debt-based system in Bangladesh. Everybody feels they overthrew the government. It creates carnage. And suddenly you need a US base and an IMF loan in order to have a tied loan where the money goes back into American contractors, which pushes up the price of the dollar, increases the deficit, creates more inflation that is exported and exported. And then when it goes wrong and they run out of dollar reserves, you simply get them to print more of their local currency, which then creates more inflation with the local currencies, which then they take their reserves and buy treasuries and lend it to the very same government that overthrew them in the first place. And then you use sanctions if you don't do what they say. And those sanctions cripple the economy, lead to the individuals and people that are already suffering the oppression to have no choice but seeking money by joining a militant group. And then those militant groups are funded by the same organizations. And then the media is used to make these religious warfares that are the same organizations that profit from the open border policy that USAID is all being exposed for right now. And you get to say, we get to say in the West, we have the moral high ground. This is Western ideals. We're exporting democracy, and we're going to send some of our money to save them from the problem we created in the first place. And we use the CIA, deep state, let's call it, in order to believe that they're protecting our national security so that all of this can happen outside parliament, congressional debate, and they can become more powerful because they're representing corporate interest, which pushes up the stock price. And we're told that we need to focus on the left and the right, the Democrats versus the Republicans, the Labor versus conservative, as every 4 years we say, it's your fault because you're woke. It's your fault because you don't care about the poor and you're corrupt. And eventually that leads to civil unrest. And eventually that leads to a change of empire every 100 years, where external powerful forces that are running surplus, that are not operating off a proof of weapons network, set the new world order. And the very organizations that did that to England with the Bank of England do it to America with the Federal Reserve, and will be launching the stable coins and central bank digital currencies with whatever the new agenda is. And you get these competing interests as well. Get how it works? And war is the mechanism, which is why the proof of weapons network. It's all about the weapons, the war, the destruction, the violence, and making people believe that we're the good guys when we're funding those people that have no choice but to join your militant groups and join those camps. And how much did USAID fund into training ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban to ensure that those drugs still get exported in an open border policy in order to lead to the civil unrest and the narrative control so that Elon can spread who the next leader is, so that Elon can get hold of all the data to move into the next technocratic AI-driven stablecoin in a fight against the Fed and the different powers as we move. So then you get to topple governments. You get to replace democracy with dictators and puppet governments. You can see that in Lebanon right now. You can see that everywhere right now. And you need to accept the IMF loan. But then China comes along and says, we won't do that, but we will give you a loan through Belt and Road Initiative. And so anyone that does that, suddenly, like Somalia, oh, right, you're bombing and targeting precision targets on ISIS. When really it's about protecting the resources and ensuring that no one works with the competing power. But now the policy has changed because the proof of weapons network no longer works. The dollar is no longer working. There is a retreat. There is a recognition from looking at the macro and Bitcoin strategies as well. Anyway, all money comes back into US contractors. Stock prices like big pharma, banking, military industrial complex, they all go up. And who controls the voting rights and the board seats? The very cabal that is saying contribute every month to my pension, and BlackRock will manage it and they'll take the voting rights. So rather than you having the voting right in your share, put it in an ETF and we'll take our voting right for you. Essentially proof of stake rather than proof of work, but for stocks. And then we get to bribe the lobbies. And we can have a lobby that looks like they're all supporting Israel when they're all bought. And then if they can't be bought, then we have a blackmail ring like Jeffrey Epstein, which is about to be revealed, which is a Mossad operation. So you can say, do as we say, which was just like the Oslo Accords with Clinton. And then if they don't do that, you can just simply assassinate them if they don't work on the Epstein side. And in order to control the media and make you think that you're the good people, US aid reveal can be used in order to prop up. How do these media companies make money? All right. It turns out it's the funding from the proof of weapons network that caused the inflation that's using the media to fool us into these false narratives. And we are all fighting each other, hating each other, thinking that there's religious wars or ethnic wars or all of these things that are manufactured. Anyway, if you didn't see the headline, I put it on my X. I led to the videos. I can go to all the WikiLeaks that were covered before that. And I can go to now the US aid, which will be on the Doge website hopefully soon. That $600 million of US taxpayer money funded training camps for ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban in order to make sure that the drugs get into the different regions. And those are groups that are manufactured to make you think that they're doing it in the name of Islam so that you can hate the Muslims, so that clean break strategy can be used, which was Netanyahu's Israel first strategy to get America to fight all the wars, which is why 9/11 needed to happen in the first place in order to justify it. So eventually they can get to the final goal of the clean break memo, which is topple Iran for Israel. And American troops do it. American troops are coming back home. They're suffering depression. They're not being looked after by the proof of weapons network. Some of them end up homeless. Some of them end up addicted to the very same drugs that they fought for. And when they have to do all sorts of genocidal crimes in Iraq, like kill 1 million people, they don't come back feeling good about that. And they were doing it because they thought they were doing it for the patriotism of protecting their country from the boogie monster that their taxpayer money created. Pure, unadulterated, evil proof of weapons network. That's why we created Bitcoin. That's why the first block in Bitcoin said banks on the brink of financial disaster. On the Times newspaper that also said Israel are invading Gaza right now. And in a different podcast, I think I'll actually go through my theories on Satoshi as well, because people are asking as well. Anyway, $600 million went into those training camps. And from Israel, because the government is collapsing right now. Why? Because the people want their hostages back, and Netanyahu deliver the hostages back. We had the ex-Israeli war chief, who was the war chief on October the 7th, that did the Hannibal Directive. He confirms that the Hannibal Directive was used in order to kill their own civilians and soldiers on October the 7th. So please watch Atrocity Inc. and stop saying that's a crazy conspiracy theory. It's all being revealed right now. Right, so where are we right now? So let's get back to what's happening at the moment with the peace negotiations, and then we can wrap up the geopolitical section. So last weekend, after last week's broadcast, there were 3 Israeli hostages that were swapped for 183 Palestinian hostages that never went through due process, and were in administrative detention where they were tortured and sexual violence was used. And they are still being arrested in the West Bank at a faster rate than they're coming out in Gaza right now. Even though, remember, there's no Hamas in the West Bank, so they're doing it anyway because you're all distracted with all the executive orders, and that's all being hid. So the Palestinian hostages, they looked absolutely awful. They shared their stories. Every accusation is a confession. The things you said were happening to Israelis on October the 7th have been happening to the Palestinians. And then Trump and Netanyahu were used in order to push out a narrative that they were treated so badly and they looked so badly, even though they were on the stage in good condition. They looked very healthy. So why are you being lied to? Because the media is controlled by organizations like USAID and other NGOs. So the traditional media completely engages in the cover-up story exactly as it has. We now know that that's bought by intelligence. And we have had the 5th hostage exchange. And that has been happening smoothly. Now, this week, it wasn't so smoothly. Hamas, they came out and they suspended the hostage exchange until Israel follows what was agreed in the original commitment. So the problem is that since the ceasefire, Israel has killed 91 Palestinians, 25 of them in the last couple of weeks. So they haven't maintained the ceasefire. And the agreement was that the mobile homes and the tents come in order to give people shelter through the horrible storms. Only 2% was delivered. And remember, the media was telling us aid's coming in, it's flooding in. No, they were weaponizing starvation to try and get rid of as many as possible. We've now got 2.3 million Palestinians that are 1.7 million, probably 600,000 of them going to be found under the rubble, starving, famine, whatever it may be. And only 2% of the aid came in, even though that was part of the ceasefire agreement. The Israeli government said exactly what they're going to do, which is the Likud party, which is Netanyahu's coalition government. They said, we need you to go back to war. We don't want the hostages back. Once the hostages come back, we lose leverage. And the Israeli families are all protesting, bring them home, bring them home. We know that you're trying to sabotage the deal. They're saying we need to go back to war. And if they're saying that Netanyahu will be overthrown if he does not deliver the return to the war in phase 2, because they want the complete elimination of all Palestinians. And so phase 2 is currently being negotiated. They paused the ceasefire, saying until the aid comes in, we're not going to do the hostage swap this weekend. Trump and Netanyahu were pushing out the USAID funding narrative, the Fox narrative, the CNN narrative, the BBC narrative, and all the others. And basically, Trump said, here's my strategy. America's going to own Gaza. Then he said, I'm going to own Gaza. And Jordan and Egypt are going to take all the Palestinians, and they're not going to be able to come back. There will be no right to return. We're then, in the next few weeks, going to discuss our West Bank strategy, which will probably lead to, we're going to annex the West Bank, which is 3.5 million Palestinians that have got nothing to do with Hamas. They're run by the Palestinian Authority, a puppet government that was installed. And Israel funded Hamas in order to try and overthrow the PLO and the PA, to try and make sure that the region's always in war, so that it could get to the situation that we are in today. Trump says the Palestinians won't have the right to return. And so part of US aid is to defund UNRWA. UNRWA controls the right to return for all the diaspora, the diaspora Palestinians, so they can get rid of that right. And then he declassified the illegal Israeli settlers that are terrorizing Palestinians, burning down their homes in the West Bank, nothing to do with human shields or anything. And then they're be bulldozing their homes and replacing them with Israeli settlers so that Israelis can move in, completely illegal. And that was determined in the international court. The international court said these are complete illegal occupations. So Trump then says, because he received the 150 million from Adelson, we're going to sanction the ICC court and the ICJ court that ruled there is a plausible genocide. Remember, one of the judges had to complain that they were being blackmailed by Mossad because they said their family were going to be killed if they didn't vote in the right direction. That was all revealed, but the judges ended up resisting the Mossad operations, and they were ruled with plausible genocide because South Africa took the case forward and other jurisdictions joined the case. Trump, not talking about any of that, said, I will own Gaza. And that lines with the Kushner deal with the fund that was funded by the Saudis in order to see this as a real estate transaction. Didn't say America will own it, but we'll see. Look, I think this is posturing to get to the deal, the art of the deal, as it were. But it could create absolute carnage in the region. As I said, in order to understand Trump is my new model, you just got to follow how he makes money and how he'll profit. And then I think you can understand the things that he says. As he's done with crypto, as I covered in the crypto section, as he's done with macro, as I covered in the macro section, and why he needs to get rates down for the real estate deals. And I think it's the same for geopolitics as well. And I think that he's dreaming about deploying some of that capital from Saudi through the Kushner fund, his son-in-law, in order to buy some real estate, beachside real estate in Gaza, and maybe even build like one of those Dubai offshore in the sea islands, where you can make an artificial island right next to the gas exploration as well. So it can be done through that. So I think he just wants to do a deal. Now, I think he knows, and I do believe he knows, in fact, yes, he knows, that you cannot deploy troops. You cannot have a US occupation of the West Bank. So I think this is posturing, because he knows that if you put US troops there, there is a resistance. You can see from the hostage swap that Hamas are still there. They've been underground. They've been pretending while they're destroying and killing civilians and all of the land, so that you can destroy it, bulldoze the whole thing, and rebuild a smart city with artificial intelligence, with all of the Palantir technology that is doing occupation as a service, which will be exported around the world based upon probably a central bank digital currency or a stable coin, whatever it does, rather than building it on top of Bitcoin so they can remain sovereign. Yeah. So, I think he knows that that's very, very unrealistic, but Israel would like US troops so that the resistance can happen, which is why Israel funded it through Qatar in the first place, so it can kill American troops. American troops can fight back harder. That leads to a further resistance from Iran-led proxies in Lebanon and in Iraq and various other regions. And then Israel can come harder with America there. And then they can say, you've got to get Iran, you've got to take them out. And then that will lead to another forever war with massive aspirations from Israel to probably take some of the land in Saudi Arabia, which is why we got a comment from Netanyahu. And let's look at that so we can follow that. So the person, one of the Israeli government people, Ben Gavir, basically said that he called on the government to immediately, after the ceasefire was suspended, to basically do an assault on Gaza and kill more civilians. So he wanted to use that to go straight back in. Ben Gavir recommended, basically they were rejected, because I do believe that there is an alternative competing plan as well. That's the Israel first policy. I'm hoping that there is a reason that is following here, because Saudi Arabia and the GCC are applying some of their power. And I'm not saying they're doing it because, you know, they care about the Palestinians. I know the people do. They certainly do. You know, they want to normalize with Israel and get on with business. But the people will revolt because they need the Palestinian cause. And Israel would much rather the revolutions in the different countries, which is why it's better for the region to be red hot. So Trump puts out that narrative. And if there is a revolution within Egypt or Jordan, because the people can't take it anymore, then you can have a 2011 style Muslim Brotherhood operation where you co-opt your proxies and you replace the leadership with your leadership. And then you end up with those that are going to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. So that is one direction that I think Israel wants us to go. And I'm hoping that we can go for the peaceful direction, which is avoiding World War III. So Trump put out the narrative and he said, unless all hostages are released by 12 noon tomorrow, EST, I think it was, then all hell will break loose. And he said, I don't want drips and drabs. I want all of them. That's not going to happen. So now it gets to test Trump's request. And if this caves in, it means that the resistance still has power. If it leads to all hell breaking loose, then it means that Trump is serious and we're moving to the direction that could take us to World War III. If there is a swap and it doesn't lead to the escalation, then I think we're moving towards the direction of a peaceful region. Now, that could be disrupted at any time because Netanyahu, he came out and said, if Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday at noon, and he said hostages, that could be 3 of them, so he can save face, which was the agreement, or it could be all of them in order to go with the Trump narrative. Then the ceasefire will end and the IDF will resume intense fighting until Hamas is completely defeated. Okay, so what happened? Well, Israel capitulated. So that implies to me there are forces, whatever those forces are, that are forcing a plan. They capitulated because immediately after that, after all that posturing, all of the aid started coming in. All of the homes, all of the mobile homes, all of the tents. And suddenly they were capitulated. So there is agenda that's pushing for peace as well. Hamas now announced today the 3 hostages that they will be releasing. And now we have this whole thing. If the Palestinians, and this goes ahead tomorrow, and the Palestinian hostages are released, and it is done by 3, then it has shown that the resistance is in control of the narrative to some degree. And Trump didn't get his wishes. The Israeli government didn't get their wishes. The protesters in Israel got their wishes, and this could prevent a revolution in Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and toppling of those regions. And we don't need to go through US troops occupying Gaza and causing absolute carnage in the region and the regional war. So that is my next yardstick. If we get the hostage swap that happened tomorrow, then I believe we are on the right track for actual Saudi Arabia and the GCC getting a 2-state solution against Israel's wishes. And then I think America not occupying Gaza and being in another forever war that they can't afford. So the ceasefire is back on for now. and we have to watch what happens tomorrow, and I'll cover it next week so that you can follow the money rather than following the narrative as well. But remember, the Israeli government could fall apart if they don't get war again. So they need war in order for Netanyahu to manage that. And Trump, remember, he agreed to $7 billion for the Israeli protection. So the proof of weapons network is still being funded via the old model. We still got all the Zionists in US Congress calling it Judea and Samaria, and wanting to return the Samaria by rebuilding the temple on Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so you still got that narrative. So there are competing narratives. And then you've got US aid revealing. So it is a pretty wild time, and I think it's moving to the AI side, as I said. But the peaceful process. Remember, they've also doubled down on sanctions on Iran, which is a process that could lead to Israel getting what they want, and America fighting a war against Iran and doing regime change. They also sanctioned the ICJ, which is the plausible genocide case. They sanctioned the ICC, which is the illegal occupation. Trump's doing that. If they wanted peace, then they would remove all of that and do what they're doing with all the other regions, remove aid to Israel and use their soft power with the GCC in order to make it happen. Now, Trump did a bit of posturing. The King of Jordan, who is an MI6 implant, that also is looking after many of the Palestinian refugees from previous crises. He came to visit the White House, and Trump looked to do a humiliation exercise. He conceded slightly, saying we'll take in 2,000 children that are suffering from cancer, that are critically ill. Beautiful thing to do. But it was like a concede slightly, as if Trump's going to get his ethnic cleansing that his demands. But at the same time, he said, I'm going to work with Egypt and the GCC, and we're going to release our plan. The people in Egypt and Jordan enraged by it. The military is being deployed in order to try and control people so they don't have that uprising. And Trump's word is causing absolute carnage across the region. Egypt and Jordan moved more military to try and prevent the revolution so that they don't end up with a war. And what did Netanyahu do? He came out and said Saudi should take the Palestinians because they've got tons of land. The Saudi leadership were absolutely enraged by those comments. That can lead an uprising. They are trying to prevent a revolution of their monarch. And without a two-state solution, which is why they have to get the two-state solution in order to get the deal that Trump wants. And that means that we have to make sure that Israel doesn't get World War III and a overthrow of carnage and the Greater Israel Project, which includes parts of Saudi Arabia, parts of Jordan, parts of Egypt, the West Bank, Syria, parts of Syria, parts of Lebanon, Israel as it stands right now, and Gaza. And we're seeing all of that being delivered. So,
there's no one named Lebanon, Israel, who shares
look, the proof of weapons network AI is Syria is coming after me. Anyway, we're coming to the end of the geopolitical section. Anyway, Saudi is red hot right now. Jordan, red hot. Egypt, red hot. Tensions are absolutely wild, and military is being deployed to make sure that these revolutions don't happen, which will lead to death and destruction like it did in Arab Spring in 2011. What everyone needs to do is trade with BRICS, essentially. And Trump needs to exert his force, which I hope that he's doing. And I hope that we don't get this Zionist agenda that takes us to the violence that I think could come when you follow the money at the moment. The deal could be negotiated between Ukraine and Russia, which is happening in Saudi Arabia. And so I think all eyes are on that. We need to make sure that there is no uprisings. We need to make sure that ceasefire continues. We need to watch what phase 2 actually entails. And we need to make sure that cooler heads prevail, and we don't get that uprising in Egypt, and we do get a genuine two-state solution, which hopefully there's no Epstein bribes. Like, that's why we need to watch the Epstein files, because unfortunately Trump and Epstein did a lot of deals together, and Trump was on the Epstein plane. And we have seen the various bankers and financial institutions and JP Morgans and Jamie Dimons that are all contained on that list. So this is why I'm very scared of the tension between a pro-Zionist person being in charge of revealing all those files, because we need the truth. Without truth, we won't have peace. We can't have peace without truth. So let's see. In the meantime, there's some posturing. Trump came out and said we'll wage war on South Africa. In the meantime, that they're doing massive human rights violation. I'm not saying that they're not. They have their own struggles, but we know that that was for Israel. We're also getting the US installed Lebanese government that is saying Hezbollah can no longer be a part of it. On the 18th of February is when the ceasefire, after the extension, after Israel violated the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, the peace agreement, it extended it to 8th of February. If they don't move out by 18th of February, then they're in violation again, and they're going to have a permanent occupation in Lebanon, I'm sure, as part of the deal. Just as they said, we're doing a permanent occupation in Syria right now, and Syria, whose ex-ISIS leader, who's wearing a suit, is going to be negotiating with all the leaders right now, who was funded through US aid, that was part of training all of those death camps, that was using US aid money, that then used with Turkey to build the rebel group in order to do the overthrow of the Assad regime, because so many people in Syria hated the Assad regime. That's leading to where we are right now. So all eyes on Lebanon. There's a 24-minister government, and recognize that what we are witnessing right now is the transition from the world order of the dollar proof of weapons network, the petrodollar, the euro dollar, based upon deceit and violence of the CIA, funded by the money printing of the Federal Reserve, exported globally through the International Monetary Fund and the Bank for International Settlements, that has all these deep states in other regions that consolidate power into these, into central bank digital currencies, that is competing with a globalist technocrat artificial intelligence vision. And we are replacing one evil with another evil. This is the proof of weapons network. We're going to see, if it's in charge, if it's replaced. But we're getting lots of narratives around the fake war on terror 2.0 right now. Be very, very wary of any attacks that happen within your country that are being blamed onto refugees and illegal immigrants. You can bet your bottom dollar that they might be intelligence operations in order to build up the hate that is required in order for Elon Musk to suddenly push that narrative forward, so that your government can be toppled by somebody that's going to say mega, and give all that data for your version of Doge, which you may or may not want, that will reveal the corruption, but hand all the data over to artificial intelligence. And how do we resist? We resist by Bitcoin and by having decentralized open source technology, so that we can control the artificial intelligence and see what's actually happening. So as I said, the second evil narrative in the macro, the new, you get what you want by exposing the corruption. The conspiracy theorists were right. Now we're proving that they're true. Is that essentially they are killing the Epstein blackmail network. They're revealing the old system, and they're replacing it with a Peter Thiel, Mossad, CIA, Elon Musk, digitally central bank digital currency, stable coin, technocratic new power structure where the central banks through CBDs compete with stable coins through technocrats and AIA data. And they need you to believe that it was Biden, Genocide Joe, and Kamala Harris, Holocaust Harris, that did it all. And it wasn't a multi-left and right big operation. I don't mind. You can take it. Blame it on the Democrats. They were corrupt as hell. And Biden needs punishment for what he did. He killed all those children. And Harris did all those, allowing the illegal borders to happen. Completely complicit in the process. So that Trump and Elon and the PayPal mafia can come in and save everybody so that we beg them to give them their AI data. Because we want the proof of weapons network to be exposed. And all we need to do is recognize it and protect ourselves with Bitcoin. So essentially, we're replacing, all of these bureaucratic inefficiencies with artificial intelligence, which will do all the mass government unemployment, and will give all the data that's needed for Palantir to give it to all of the governments globally. And we have this AI warfare, and hopefully we can build open source decentralized AI that uses Bitcoin as peaceful proof of work as the resistance continues, as it started with the release of the white paper in 2008 to the cypherpunks, with the protection of WikiLeaks through Julian Assange using Bitcoin as the financial blockade happened, with the fact that we're now getting these Bitcoin strategic reserves with the countries that are being protected from that to protect the world from digital communism powered by artificial intelligence, deep state, deep data governments that want all of the energy that's needed to power for this whole thing. And with that in mind, we need to prepare. So I hope you enjoyed